Greetings. It's been a little while since I've uploaded anything, but I'm delighted to present to you my first video of 2026. I recently got myself a Helix LT, as you can see, and today I'm basically going to do a video about how to use it in combination with Neural DSP plugins and to control them with MIDI to effectively turn this thing into basically a quad cortex, kind of. So I've been super impressed with this thing because there's just so many things that you can do with it. There's so many different ways to use it and different functions. However, and this is kind of a big however, coming over from using Neural DSP plugins for a long time now and then switching my tones to using one of these, I basically instantly found that the amp simulators in this thing leave a little bit to be desired and they're not basically as good as Neural DSP. Trouble with that, I was looking at getting a quad cortex, but obviously they're about twice the price of one of these and they have less functionality in them, I'd argue, so let's put you down, lad. I've made a few videos before about how to use Ableton Live with guitar and using these plugins as kind of live guitar rig or other things like live looping and stuff like that using Ableton and using amp sims to kind of get away from having to use physical gear. I wanted to be able to do it physically again, but also integrate the Helix into this rig that I've gotten used to with using the Neural DSP plugins and tones. And it's pretty cool because you can basically expand the functions of the Helix and any Neural DSP plugins that you're using to get more out of them, and I'll show you how that works. So as you can see, I've got the guitar coming into an Ableton session here. I'm running two plugins by Neural DSP, so I'm running Archetype Cory Wong and I'm running Archetype Petrucci at the same time. But I like to use Archetype Cory Wong for my clean tones or like my clean amp, and then I like to use either Archetype Abassi or Archetype Petrucci for my high gain tones. Then you'll notice that I have a switch here, which if I press that, So what's going on there is I'm instantly switching from playing through Cory Wong as my clean channel, and then I'm instantly switching over to Archetype Petrucci as like my high gain channel. Then basically, if I continue through the switches that I've got assigned here, if I switch over to Petrucci, so I can activate the doubler in Petrucci, which is this thing here. In the Helix, kind of setting up a stereo patch like that can be a bit of an annoying workaround where you have to use like multiple cab blocks and kind of panning them left and right. And even when you do that, it still doesn't exactly sound like that kind of idea of a wide double track guitar. I haven't actually tested this live yet. I'm not sure how well that would work in an actual venue, but it's kind of cool that I've got the control to just turn that on or off. The next thing, you can see I've got an Octaver. As you can see, neither Cory Wong or Petrucci has an octave effect in it, but that's something that I really like to use as part of my tone. So if I go into the patch here, you can see I'm not running any amp sims. I'm just using it as an effects platform for a few extra effects. In the example of Cory Wong in these plugins, obviously your guitar signal comes in and hits the wah. Then it hits the preamp effects, then the amp, then all the cabinet simulator, the EQ, and then finally the delay and reverb at the end of the signal chain. So the way to think about this is that the Helix is basically another block to the left of this input here where it's coming in and hitting these effects. So I can put on things like the Octaver before it hits the distortion and the stuff in the rest of the chain. So yeah, you can kind of expand the functionality and expand the effects that you're using in these plugins by putting them in the Helix instead. Next up is spooky mode, which is just what I call vibrato. So for example, and I've also got a patch here which is called the Auto Volume Echo. I've talked about this before. So this is actually a legacy patch from the Line 6 DL4. It's like a reverse or swelled delay. I've got these two switches here for Cory's delay and Cory's wash, which is going to activate the delay and the reverb in Archetype Cory Wong at the end of the signal chain, which then turns my guitar stereo as well. So we go from a mono signal there. But if I engage the reverb, And yeah, I also have another effect in here, which is pitch whammy. I've got this permanently on, and then the way I've got that set up is that when the foot pedal is all the way down or at the top, I'm just at no pitch shifting is happening. So you can see toe pitch is set to 0. But heel pitch, I've got set to -2 semitones. So I can essentially bend things like that down and go, which is pretty cool. And I can also activate the delay. And I can get other tones. So for example, if I wanted to add vibrato now to my kind of shoegazy ambient whale noise stuff, but yeah, you could map this to anything that you wanted. And then of course, if you want to add other different effects to it, you can just come in here. Because we're not using the amp simulators, for example, if I put an amp sim into this, and especially if I wanted to run it in stereo, that's obviously using up more DSP and resources from the Helix. And yeah, if you're running amp sims, then it means you basically can't run as many effects because the Helix can't handle that much going on. So by basically offloading the amp sim part of the job to the Neural DSP plugins, I'm kind of saving DSP in the Helix so that I can put more effects on, and I could go really mad with it if I wanted to and have like kind of ridiculous, crazy long effects chains because I'm not worrying about the amp DSP load. Now I'm going to switch over to actually showing you how to set this up in Ableton. It's actually really easy to do, doesn't take long at all, so I'll show you that now. So the first thing I'm going to set up is the amp switching, and that's toggling between the 2 different plugins and your Ableton preferences. Just make sure that your input device is set to your Helix, which is transmitting over USB. Comes to USB connection, make sure that you're not using a USB hub. Get yourself a cable that will go directly from the Helix into your laptop. The Helix will just basically misbehave and cut out a lot if you're trying to run it through a hub, so it needs a really solid USB connection directly to your machine, basically. Next thing you want to do is make sure you've got your buffer size nice and low, so you want to get that as low as possible to cut out the input latency while still letting your computer kind of function. If you go too low with that, then you might start hearing clicks and pops in your audio, and you might start getting, you know, crackle and CPU problems. So if you can kind of set that anywhere from these values, maybe up to about, I wouldn't go much further than 256, otherwise you're really going to start feeling a delay, but anywhere around here should be all right. I'll put it at 128, even though I can go lower if you need to. You've got a latency compensation thing that you can do here. So for example, you can see I've got 6.48 milliseconds of latency in my system. I can just offset that a bit like this, and you can see now I've got an apparent, I mean, it says 0.0 ms. Next thing is under MIDI settings, just make sure that the buttons track and remote are enabled on the input port of your Helix, and then that will enable us to assign it with MIDI controls to things in Ableton. So that's what you need to worry about, the preferences setup. So I've created an audio track here, and I've set that to input 1, which is where my guitar's coming in. I've got a blank preset here on the Helix, so I can start from scratch. So that is the DI signal of the guitar coming through the Helix and coming into software with no amp sim processing, nothing on it. So what I'm going to do is add something called an audio effect rack. Under audio effects on the left hand here, I'm going to grab audio effect rack, drag that onto my guitar track, and then basically what I'll be able to do with that is nest multiple Neural DSP plugins within it on the same audio track. So I'm going to grab Archetype Cory Wong, drag that in there. I'm going to grab Archetype Petrucci. So if I press this little button here, it opens up that window. That's done that incorrectly. I want that like that. Let's just rename those so it's a bit easier to see what I'm looking at. So I've got my 2 plugins loaded in. I'm going to load up my sort of default preset. Where is it? Just like that. So, all right. So I've got my 2 plugins loaded in, but at the moment you can hear my guitar is playing through both of them layered at the same time, which I don't want. So open up this little chain menu here. This is incredibly tiny on my monitor, so it's quite difficult to see, but I'm going to grab the blob associated with Petrucci and drag that over so it's on chain 1, like so. It's a bit annoying that my mouse is covering it. There you go. So like that. And you can see I've got this little blue line here, which I can use to switch between. So there my signal's coming through Cory Wong, and if I drag it over. So I want to be able to control that little blue line with the Helix so that I can switch between them. How do you do that? Well, right click on the blue line and go to map to macro 1. You see that creates this little control here called chain selector. And now I need to hit the MIDI button in the top right of Ableton, which is where this will allow me to assign things to MIDI control. So I'm going to click on that chain selector knob, and then I'm going to hit this switch on my Helix. And as you can see, that did nothing. Why did that do nothing? Because I need to set up things on the Helix. So let's go into the menu of the Helix and then go into Command Center. So here's where I can reassign what all of these foot switches do. And that one is actually, so that's foot switch 2. That's the one I'm trying to assign. So if I change that command to a CC toggle is what I want. And now if you had something else plugged into your laptop, maybe like a little MIDI controller like that, I would give the Helix its own MIDI channel just so it doesn't get any crosstalk or confusion, because sometimes you might end up putting an assignment on the Helix, and if that's on the same MIDI channel as something like your MIDI keyboard, then pressing that switch is going to trigger a note on the keyboard. So maybe just set that to something like channel 2 or whatever, just so it's not going to interfere with anything else. Next thing is going to be the CC value of that control, so I'll just set that to 1. And that should have done it. And now in theory, if I go back to that MIDI assignment, click on my chain selector, and then hit that switch again. There we go. You can see that just got assigned. So now if I start turning this on and off, so the annoying thing there is that that switch is jumping between 0 and 127. You can see that's happening there with this blue bar. But obviously I want that to jump up to 1. Very easy to change that. Once again, open the MIDI window. Over here, you've got your MIDI assignments, and you can see these are where you can set the minimum and maximum values of that control. So just go to where it says 127 as the max value, change that to 1, hit enter, and now you can see. So interestingly, obviously that won't show up in your blocks routing, but if I press the home page, you can see I've got that there as CC toggle. And yeah, I might just rename that. I'm going to use the Helix Edit software because it's a bit easier to do this in Helix Edit rather than trying to do it on there with the rotary control. So let's open up the Command Center window, navigate to that foot switch, and I'll just call that like amp switcher. I'll give it a color so I can make that yellow, for example. And now I've got my amp switcher control here. And let's just quickly do the same thing again I'll just quickly map the reverb and the delay in Archetype Cory Wong so that you can see how that works. So again, going into Command Center, let's go to foot switch 3, change that to a CC toggle command, adapt that to MIDI channel 2, and then let's set that to CC control 2. Hit the MIDI window in Ableton, click on the delays on or off function, and then again, engage on or off with that foot switch. Whee! There we go. So I just assigned my delay to that second foot switch. And now if I click on the wash on and off button and then hit foot switch C, and there you go. You're going back into the Helix Edit software. Let's go to the Command Center. Let's go to that control. So I'll rename that. Foot switch 3 is the delay. And then finally, this foot switch here is called the wash. And then we can set up the color coding on the foot switches through this menu here. It just makes it a bit easier than trying to do that on the Helix itself. And there you go. That's basically it. And of course, now if I want to add other effects to this from the Helix, I could add whatever really. Pitch shifter. Let's add that octave effect as well. Octaver. And then obviously this all just works the way you would normally expect with the Helix. So I can assign the pitch shifter to that one, and then, you know, putting the vibrato down here. So now my homepage looks like that. It's a bit annoying that you can't change the color of the MIDI labels, so they're all just gray. And I don't think there is a way to change that. But to be fair, it doesn't really matter because I usually just look at the foot switches anyway, kind of know what each thing is. So that's pretty fun. And obviously you can do this all differently depending on different presets. This would still work with all the snapshot settings and stuff like that. So you could have these MIDI signals all set in that particular way. And then you could have a bank of snapshots where, for example, you're switching between those different MIDI assignments as well as the effects in the Helix. You can combine all of that together, which I think is pretty awesome. And yeah, you can just kind of go wild with the effects. So because we've got loads of DSP resources spare because we're not using the amp sims within the Helix. So that's pretty cool. If you just think about the fact that you can assign these foot switches to any MIDI value, then that means that you can assign that to control anything in Ableton that you can assign MIDI to. So again, I'm not going to go into a whole guitar looping tutorial here, but let's just like load up the looper in Ableton, put that on my guitar channel. So I've got a looper here, show you how quickly you can do it. So let's go to foot switch 5, change that to a CC toggle, change that to CC value 5, enable MIDI mapping in Ableton, click on this big old record button here and smash that. There we go. Now I've got an on-off control for the looper. So start that going. Does that work? There we go. So I could control a looper in Ableton using the Helix on the foot switch that way as well. Obviously, this has got a looper built into it, but the advantage of running it in Ableton is it's going to be taking the tempo from Ableton. So that basically means that the delays from the guitar are going to be on the same kind of clock, the MIDI clock that it is running in Ableton. which means that all your guitar delays and looping and stuff, if you're listening to that metronome, you'll be perfectly in time with the looper. And when that starts and stops recording as well, because it will all be to these bar values. Again, a lot of really cool advantages become available in this. But yeah, just as an experiment, I thought it'd be cool to do a little tonal comparison of using the Helix versus using Neural DSP plugins like this. So I'm now here on the Helix with one of the first presets that I started to fiddle around with when I first got this thing. And the experiment was to try and basically recreate the rig that I'm using with these plugins, but within the Helix. So I'm just going to play a short section from one of my tracks called Nightmares and this kind of heavy halftime breakdown section, which almost exclusively makes use of the low open F sharp. So the tab is just a load of zeros and X's pretty much, but so it's a good test for this sort of riff. And I'll just do a recording using only the Helix. So you can see I've disconnected the USB cable and I'm connected to my audio interface coming out of the Helix in stereo. And I'm coming into a track here in Ableton using the analog. So I'm not using the USB input, I'm actually using the analog. So I'm actually recording from the Helix and there's no Neural DSP amps in the chain or anything like that. It's all coming from just the Helix. So let's record that and kind of see how that compares or what that sounds like. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same section again, but now I'm going to use the Neural DSP plugins and controlling them with the Helix on the ground. So let's see. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a quick overview of just the tonal difference that is available between the Helix and the Neural DSP plugins, especially the high gain ones. I find with the Helix, it's very difficult to get it close to that kind of there's something in the top end articulation and the bite of the tone from the Archetype plugins that I find is just a little bit more satisfying. And that's pretty much the basics of how you do that, and I think that is something that a few people have been curious how to do yourself. Obviously there's loads of ways that you could use this. It's totally up to you. If you've made it this far, or if any of the information in this video was useful to you and it's helped you out, consider giving a like and subscribe, as that would obviously really help me out in return as well. Should be back pretty soon with a new video, but until then, thanks very much for watching and take it easy.